The Haunting of the Cemetery. Chapter 1, The Visit. Lila had always been fascinated by cemeteries. She loved the quiet stillness and the sense of history that seemed to emanate from the gravestones. So, when she found out that her town had an old cemetery that was supposedly haunted, she knew she had to visit. As she walked through the wrought iron gates, Lila felt a chill run down her spine. The trees cast eerie shadows across the headstones, and the silence was broken only by the sound of her own footsteps. She wandered through the rows of graves, reading the inscriptions and imagining the lives of the people buried there. But as she turned a corner, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Standing in front of her was a figure in a long, black cloak. Its face was shrouded in darkness, and Lila couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. For a moment, she froze, unsure of what to do. But then the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. Lila's heart was pounding as she raced back to the gates. As she pushed them open, she turned back to look at the cemetery. In the darkness, she thought she saw the figure again, watching her from behind a tree. But then it was gone, and Lila knew she had to come back and investigate further. Chapter 2, The Legend. The next day, Lila went to the local library to research the history of the cemetery. She found an old book that told the story of a young girl who had died under mysterious circumstances and was buried in the cemetery. The book also spoke of a legend that said the girl's spirit still roamed the grounds, seeking revenge on those who wronged her. Lila was intrigued by the story, and she decided to dig deeper. She talked to the librarian, who told her that many people in the town believed in the legend and warned her not to go back to the cemetery alone. Undeterred, Lila continued her research and found more stories of strange occurrences at the cemetery. People had reported seeing ghostly figures, hearing strange noises, and feeling a sense of unease when walking through the grounds. Lila was convinced that there was something supernatural at the cemetery, and she was determined to find out more. She decided to recruit her friend, Jake, to help her investigate. Together, they would uncover the truth behind the legend. Chapter 3, The Investigation. Lila and Jake returned to the cemetery that night, armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure. As they made their way through the rows of graves, they felt a sense of unease. It was as if the very air around them was charged with an eerie energy. As they walked, they heard strange noises, like whispers on the wind. Lila felt her heart racing as they approached the section of the cemetery where the girl from the legend was buried. She shone her flashlight on the gravestone, and they both gasped when they saw that it was cracked in two. Suddenly, they heard a rustling sound and turned to see the figure in the black cloak standing just a few feet away. This time, they could see its face, and they both recoiled in horror. Its skin was gray and its eyes were hollow, as if it were not of this world. For a moment, they stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But then they heard a scream, and they knew they had to act fast. They raced towards the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found themselves in a clearing, where they saw a group of people huddled around a gravestone. They heard the sound of chanting and saw that the people were dressed in black robes. Lila and Jake hid behind a tree, watching in horror as the group performed a dark ritual. They could feel the energy in the air growing more and more intense. And then, suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and everything went black. Chapter 4, The Confrontation. When Lila and Jake regained consciousness, they found themselves in a strange room with no windows and only one door. They were both bound and gagged, unable to move or speak. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they saw that they were not alone. In the corner of the room, they saw the figure in the black cloak. It was staring at them with its lifeless eyes, and Lila could feel the fear rising in her chest. Suddenly, the door opened, and a group of people dressed in black robes entered the room. They were the same people they had seen performing the dark ritual in the cemetery. Lila and Jake watched in horror as the group began to circle them, chanting in a language they didn't understand. They felt the energy in the room growing stronger, and they knew that something terrible was about to happen. But then, Lila remembered something she had read in her research. She began to recite an ancient incantation she had found, hoping that it would break the spell that had been cast upon them. To her surprise, the group stopped chanting and stared at her in shock. Suddenly, the figure in the black cloak stepped forward and removed its hood. They saw that it was an old woman, with a kind face and gentle eyes. The woman explained that the group was a coven of witches, and they had been trying to communicate with the spirit of the girl from the legend. They had not meant to harm Lila and Jake, but they had been caught up in the energy of the ritual. Lila and Jake were relieved to hear this, but they were still scared. The woman promised to release them and to help them leave the cemetery safely. As they made their way back through the cemetery, Lila and Jake felt a sense of relief that they had survived the ordeal. But they also knew that they would never forget the fear and horror they had experienced that night. Chapter 5: The Aftermath. After their terrifying experience in the cemetery, Lila and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They felt like something was following them, always lurking just out of sight. As the days went by, they tried to put the experience behind them, but they couldn't help feeling like something had changed. They were more cautious, more aware of their surroundings. One night, Lila woke up in a cold sweat, convinced that she had seen the ghostly figure from the cemetery standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed and woke Jake, who turned on the lights and searched the room, but they found nothing. From that night on, Lila and Jake started to experience strange occurrences. They heard footsteps in the hallway, even though they were alone in the house. They saw objects move on their own, and they heard whispers in the darkness. They knew that they had brought something back with them from the cemetery, something that was haunting them. They decided to seek help, and they went to a local medium who specialized in dealing with spirits. The medium performed a ritual and explained that the spirit they had encountered was the girl from the legend. She had been trapped in the cemetery for years, seeking revenge on those who had wronged her. The medium helped Lila and Jake to communicate with the spirit, and they were able to help her find peace. The strange occurrences in their home stopped, and they were finally able to move on from the traumatic experience. But Lila and Jake never forgot the lessons they had learned. They knew that there were things in the world that were beyond their understanding, and they knew that they had to be careful when dealing with the supernatural. They never went back to the cemetery again, but they always felt a sense of unease whenever they passed by it. How did you like my story? If you like it, then please give me a thumbs up and let me know in the comments. I love to hear from you. Want more creepy stories? Just click on subscribe. Do that. Now, I am looking forward to meet you in my next story.